To je komad tkanine boje bijelokosti s raznim ponešto tamnijim obilježjima. Je li to doista slika Isusa Krista nakon razapinjanja na križ, kako mnogi vjeruju? Jesu li mrlje doista od njegove krvi? Testovi ugljikom kojima se određuje starost kažu da nisu, nego da je to platno domišljata srednjovjekovna krivotvorina. No, novije informacije izazvale su ozbiljne sumnje u točnost ugljikova testa. Znanstvenici su se ponovno posvetili starom pitanju, je li to slika raspetoga Krista? Suvremena tehnologija otvorila je nova vrata u potrazi za platnom. Od 1400. platno je mnogo puta izvađeno iz svog srebrnog sanduka da bi uveličalo kraljevska vjenčanja ili bilo izloženo pogledima nebrojenih hodočasnika. U Europi se platno pojavilo 1355. Bilo je dobro poznato tijekom najstrašnijih godina crne smrti, kada su gomile ljudi čekale u redu da bi ga vidjele, kada je Gutenberg usavršio tiskarski stroj i Kolumbo otkrio Ameriku. U vremenu koje nije imalo mnogo znanstvenih pomagala, a krivotvorine su bile uobičajena pojava, pitanje autentičnosti platna nije se moglo riješiti. Javnost je općenito smatrala da je platno autentično, ali rasprava između znanosti i religije tek je započela. Godine 1898. crkva je dopustila da bezlično oko kamere, tada novi izum, ispita tkaninu. Nitko nije mogao očekivati da će fotografija koju je Secondo Pia načinio toga dana zauvijek promijeniti način na koji su ljudi gledali na platno. Jer kad je fotograf izvadio staklenu ploču iz razvijača, ugledao je jasne obrise lica i to nije sličilo ničemu što se na platnu prije moglo vidjeti. Odmah je shvatio da je sjenovita slika na tkanini negativ i da sada gleda pozitiv. U rukama je držao sliku koja će potaknuti stoljeća znanstvenih ispitivanja. Sto godina poslije te prve fotografije, grad Torino priprema se za još jedno javno prikazivanje platna. Dotad je ta rukotvorina postala predmetom najvećih istraživanja u povijesti čovječanstva. Za platno je pripremljena nova tehnologija. Hermetički zatvoren sanduk od aluminija i stakla iz kojega je isisan zrak, a ubačen plin argon. Otkad je platno stavljeno u sanduk, nikad ga više nitko neće saviti, niti njime neoprezno baratati. Sva ta aktivnost može se činiti pretjeranom ako je točan rezultat ugljikova testa koji kaže da je platno krivotvorina. Je li riječ o slijepoj vjeri ili ima razloga sumnjati u znanstvene rezultate? Platno je ponovno središte kontroverzije. Na neoznačenom ulazu sa strane pristup čuva straža. Daleko od očiju javnosti, te u nazočnosti samo jedne kamere, švicarski tekstilni stručnjak pažljivo ušiva platno na novu podlogu na koju je platno stavljeno. Čuvar platna, Don Giovanni Ghiberti, nimalo ne sumnja u to koga je ta tkanina prekrivala. Na torinskom platnu postoje 3 vrste znakova. Najočitiji su znakovi tragovi od požara, koji je u srednjem vijeku zamalo da nije platno uništio. Zatim je tu anatomski ispravna slika čovjeka s prednje i stražnje strane. Treći su znakovi mrlje od krvi. Te mrlje od krvi odgovaraju biblijskom opisu mučenja i razapinjanja Isusa na križ, batinanje, krune od trnja, rana od koplja. Ali je li krv doista krv i kako se slika uopće našla na tkanini? Tajna kojom su ta pitanja obavijena već je naraštajima izazov za znanstvenike. Studenti koledža u Glendaleu u Kaliforniji posebno su upoznati s raspravom o platnu. Njihov profesor, Angelo Montante, upotrebljava platno kao sredstvo poučavanja.
This is one of the most amazing cultural artifacts that we find in the history of Western civilization. Clues can be drawn out of it that gives us a perspective on the past.
The Bible does not give us details dealing with the crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth. But let me call your attention to the spot right here where there was bloodshed. If classical paintings were correct, he should have been nailed through the palm. But he wasn't. He was nailed through the wrist. And there has to be a reason for that. And we know what the reason is because of some research done by a French physician.
Years ago, a French surgeon experimenting with cadavers was able to determine that the palm cannot maintain the weight of a human being. It has to be through the mesocarpal region of the wrist.
Something else is important in this regard. When you nail a person in that area, you press on the median nerve. And when you press on that median nerve, the thumb goes in. And if you'll notice, you do not see thumbs on the figure at all. That's a very accurate kind of thing. How could a forger have possibly known that? Here we have another enhanced image of the shroud. This darkened matter represents blood. Here, more blood on the arms. And then the whole torso is bleeding.
Na prsnoj strani, blizu petoga rebra, vidimo neobičan trag krvi koji odgovara obliku rimskoga koplja koje se upotrebljavalo u vrijeme raspeća.
There is a lot of blood on the shroud. So much so that it makes you wonder at the cruelty of the Romans, that they inflicted such pain on this individual.
Okrutnost koju pokazuje platno nadilazi najbolje umjetničke opise Kristove muke. Zašto bi krivotvoritelj pokazao toliko mnogo više nego što su ljudi očekivali? Kratkim, krvavim prugama na leđima i nogama čovjeka s platna godinama su se čudili istraživači, dok nije primijećeno da odgovaraju neobičnom obliku flagruma, bića koji se upotrebljavao u 1. stoljeću.
I'm holding in my hand a replica of a Roman instrument of torture. It's called the flagrum. And at the end of each thong, you find these dumbbells. Notice that there is a space between the 2 dumbbells.
Ni suvremena medicina ne bi vjerojatno mogla spriječiti njegovu smrt. Zbog anatomske preciznosti slike možemo odrediti težinu rana čovjeka na platnu. Ta je slika tako precizna da je suvremeni liječnici mogu čitati.
This is a quarter-size negative of a picture of the shroud, and it appears to be a middle-aged male. If we assume that blood is going to appear white, there are other things that will appear white as well, but if we assume that blood is going to appear white...
Dr. Zelat je stručnjak za očitavanje rentgenskih snimki žrtava akutnih trauma.
Bleeding diffuse about the scalp, both in the front and in the back. There's areas in the chest, again in the front and in the back, that look as if there's been bleeding. You can see that there's been an injury to the left wrist. Can't see the right wrist because the left hand covers the right wrist, but there appears to be an area of injury to the left wrist with blood on both forearms. The posterior portion of both legs and the buttocks are covered with blood as well. In both ankles, there appears to have been some bleeding as well. It's impossible to say what the cause of death was, although there's multiple areas of injury, any one of which could have been fatal.
Rane su takve da upućuju samo na jedan uzrok smrti, razapinjanje na križ. Kasnih 70-ih skupina znanstvenika izvršila je pritisak na crkvu da dopusti ispitati platno uz pomoć najnovije tehnologije. Na kraju je postignut sporazum i istraživački projekt STURP ili Torinsko platno bio je na putu u Italiju.
STURP was put together primarily with the purpose of examining the shroud to determine how the image was formed. But we had the big problem of never being able to see the thing we were to examine until we got there. It was like an expedition into an unknown part of the jungle. We brought with us a host of technologies, virtually every type of imaging that we had available to us to determine how the image was formed. I thought that I was going to be able to walk into the room, see the shroud unveiled, walk up to it, look closely, see the brush strokes, and go home.
Jedan od znanstvenika projekta je i Vern Miller. On je u početku bio veoma skeptičan.
The first time I heard about the Shroud of Turin was from Barry Schwartz, which I thought was a fairy tale of some type. But STURP's objective was to find the mechanism that caused the image to appear on a piece of linen cloth, and not to authenticate the cloth as the burial wrapping of Christ. So relieved of that responsibility, we could look at it in a much more objective way.
I didn't know what the shroud was at the time. I'd never heard of it to my knowledge.
Član projekta Torinsko platno Don Lin, kompjutorski stručnjak, na neko je vrijeme napustio svoj redoviti posao u NASA.
At the time we were working on the Viking program, which was a soft lander on Mars.
We basically had one day to set up the equipment, get it unpacked, set up, and calibrated. And that night, we were supposed to get the shroud around midnight. And of course, about 11 o'clock, a little early, very unusual, the shroud was brought down the hallway into the room. One of the first experiments that was done on the shroud was to separate the cloth from its backing cloth in a small area, about 4 inches. That allowed us the first look at the backside or the underside of the Shroud of Turin in 400 years, and this image is the precise moment that they took their first peek at the back of the shroud. Then Professor Rigi of the Italian team inserted an endoscopic camera between the two cloths. When I saw that focusing light underneath the number 3 bloodstain, I turned off the room lights, he turned on the focusing light, and we saw for the first time that the bloodstains had actually soaked into the cloth the way blood would, and the image did not.
I odmah, važno otkriće. Kad se gleda s prednje strane, i slika i krv jasno se vide. Ali kad se svjetlo postavi sa stražnje strane platna, krv se vidi, ali ne i slika.
That was something we didn't know until that moment, which meant the image could not be a painting, or we would have a density of paint on the shroud that would show in a transmitted light photograph.
We were all anxious to find if the blood was real or not. When I first viewed the shroud during those tests, the blood did not look real to me. The blood looked quite red. and fresh, other than something that was supposedly 2,000 years old. To determine if this was real blood, we took samples on a sticky back tape and then examined it in a laboratory much later. It was not until several months later that we determined that this was real blood. Okay, in the next slide, we show the actual blood on the weave of the cloth. This photomicrograph is 30
Je li to
times, and
Isusova krv?
what's interesting about that is
Ili je to
the
krv neke druge
fibrils
osobe
are not
koju su
covered.
Rimljani razapeli na križ?
The wear
Ili je to
and tear.
krv nevina čovjeka koji je ubijen da bi se izvela ova izvanredna prijevara?
One of the theories of image formation on the shroud was that it might be a scorch because the color is something like the scorched color of an ironing board cover. In normal light, both scorch and image look the same. Since all scorches fluoresce under ultraviolet light, we imaged the shroud using UV photography. We did not see body image. We got wonderful images of all the scorches on the shroud, but the body image didn't show at all, proving that the body image could not be a scorch.
Što se tiče onoga što je moglo uzrokovati sliku, znanstvenici isključuju jednu mogućnost za drugom.
Microanalysis of the threads that were brought back determined that the color change of the threads was due to a chemical change, dehydrated oxidation. But we do not know what caused that chemical change.
Mrlje na tkanini jedva su zamjetljive i složene. Jedno je vlakno izblijedjelo, a drugo nije. Ipak svako je vlakno samo 1/10 promjera ljudske kose. Na nekim mjestima slika prodire samo 500 inča. Nema poznatog načina na koji bi se takvo obilježje repliciralo na tkanini. Većina je stručnjaka sada uvjerena da slika nije nacrtana. U nastojanju da shvate kako je stvorena, znanstvenici su je stavili u stroj koji se zove VP8, analizator slike, jedinstveni uređaj koji nas upotrebljava za tumačenje fotografija iz svemira.
If we place a perfectly normal young man's picture under the VP8,
Svaka dvodimenzionalna slika, poput fotografije ili crteža, ne može se dobro očitati. Oblik predmeta će se iskriviti.
the hair, which we know to be over the brow, is actually sunken because it's darker, whereas the face, the cheeks, are actually elevated because they're lighter.
Tako bi se trebala iskriviti i fotografija platna, ali nije tako. Kada su ovu sliku prvi put vidjeli, znanstvenici su bili veoma iznenađeni. Bio je to možda jednako dramatičan trenutak kao kada je sekondopija prvi put ugledao negativ slike platna.
We notice that the nose is above the cheeks and that the face is of the proper dimension. The beard and the hair are all
Analiza
in the correct
VP8
height.
pokazala je kako je slika nastala dok je tkanina bila omotana oko trodimenzionalnog predmeta. Prema pravoslavnoj tradiciji, na Veliki petak, na dan kada je Isus umro, iznosi se satkana tapiserija i nosi kao da je uzeta iz groba. Ta je tradicija stara više od 1000 godina. Svaka je tapiserija drukčija. Ipak svaka sadržava sliku Isusa položena na mrtvački pokrov, a tijelo mu je okruženo cvijećem. Sličnost s platnom ne može se poreći. Mnogi kažu da ta tradicija stavljanja cvijeća oko Isusove slike na njegov mrtvački pokrov zadire u početke kršćanske crkve. Posljednjih je godina gotovo nezamjetljiva slika cvijeća otkrivena i na platnu. Tim su se istraživanjima bavili dr. Alan Wenger sa sveučilišta Duke i njegova žena Mary. Wenger je iznio pretpostavku da su neke slike izvan tijela na platnu otisci cvijeća. Na to istraživanje ponukao ga je rad njemačkog fizičara Osvalda Schwermana.
He noticed these, but I didn't see what he was talking about at first. But later on, I noticed the image of a flower very closely resembling a chrysanthemum. And as I backed off and looked around, I began seeing many of these images on the shroud. Obviously, these were banked in around the body at the time of burial.
Namjena cvijeća nije poznata. Možda kao sredstvo za raskuživanje, budući da je tijelo bilo pokopano u žurbi ili pak u čast
And
pokojnika.
by studying the shroud very carefully, we feel that we identified actually 28 of these flowers on the shroud.
Wenger je proučavao detalje na platnu uspoređujući ih s fotografijama u prirodnoj veličini cvijeća koje je nalikovalo onomu s platna.
In addition, we're able to determine the flowering time of these, and all of these flowers bloom in either March or April, which indicate that this was the time of Passover, the time of crucifixion.
Mnoge biljke koje je Wenger prepoznao čini se da potječu s područja Jeruzalema. Pokazali su svoje rezultate vodećem izraelskom botaničaru Avinoamu Daninu.
Using details of plant morphology, I was rather happy to confirm their observations. Then I looked more and more, and altogether I marked here about 12 or 13 objects, botanical objects, that I observed on the shroud.
Jedna od biljaka, Zygophyllum dumosum, za botaničara Danina bila je ključni dokaz. Ne samo da je njezinu sliku vidio na platnu, nego je našao još preciznije pojedinosti od Wengera. Je li ta biljka nekad ležala na torinskom platnu?
We can see here the image of Zygophyllum dumosum. The winter leaf looks like that. This is the petiole. Here is the petiole.
Zygophyllum dumosum raste samo na jednom mjestu na svijetu, na malom području blizu Jeruzalema.
The four leaves I found is so clear that I can state that the stem of Zygophyllum dumosum was laid on the shroud in the spring. Additionally, I could say to you that it couldn't be that the shroud was made somewhere else. It had to be here.
Ako je oko tijela bilo cvijeća, trebalo bi biti i peluda. Pelud može trajati 1000 godina i pod mikroskopom se svaki tip razlikuje. Čestice su premalene za golo oko. Samo čekaju pravog detektiva. Godine 1973. švicarskom kriminologu Maxu Fraju dopušteno je da uzme uzorak peluda s nabora platna. Sačuvao ih je na stakalcima. Kao botaničar godinama je analizirao sadržaj peluda. Umro je prije nego što je mogao završiti posao i objaviti svoje zaključke, ali njegov su posao nastavili drugi, s pomoću suvremene tehnologije. Oni mogu točno odrediti svako zrnce peluda i usporediti ga s biljkom. Uri Baruch, vodeći izraelski stručnjak za pelud, radeći s doktorom Daninom, izračunao je tip i učestalost peludi na Frajevim stakalcima.
And we haven't met this one before. It's the first instance of this pollen type.
Cilj je utvrditi točno koje su biljke okruživale tijelo i kojih je bilo više. Od 58 dosad identificiranih vrsta peluda, 28 biljaka raste samo na Bliskom istoku, što je dokaz da je tkanina dio svoje povijesti provela ondje. Mnoge, poput Vignon molis, još se mogu naći na tom području.
The leaves of Vignon molis are used by the Bedouin in southern Sinai to heal superficial wounds. They take the green stems and leaves and burn it. The powdered ash is used to put on the wound. They call it uraga.
There is another gundelia right now of Vignon, so please write
Stakalca
it
su
down.
otkrila neobično visoku gustoću peludi biljke Gundelia turneforti.
And this is even much clearer than the former one, so maybe
Ovaj primjerak potječe s mjesta blizu glave čovjeka s platna.
you can see the spines, okay? Here one, here one, here one, and you can also see the ridges.
Biljka koja je ostavila tako mnogo peluda na ovom mjestu platna može se prepoznati po svom cvijetu, ali je poznatija po nečemu drugome.
I have to use my knife because it's a highly spiny plant. This is Gundelia turneforti, the thistle that has the highest frequency of pollen grains on the shroud of Turin.
U ovom grčkom pravoslavnom manastiru duboko u Sinajskoj pustinji nalazi se posve osobita slika Isusa Krista poznata pod nazivom Pantokrat. Mnogi su istraživači uvjereni da je slikana prema platnu, a potječe iz 6. stoljeća.
We see on the icon that the eyes have a very large staring appearance, but we rotate it to the shroud. We see that the eyes on the shroud have the appearance of being wide and staring and little off center. We notice through polarizing
Dr. Wenger usavršuje tehniku polarizirajućeg svjetla da bi usporedio slike s platna s drugim slikama poput Pantokrata.
The filter looking at these two images on the screen, one image will fade into the other. We do this for exacting comparisons. On the icon, we can notice what appears to be a tear trickling down the cheek at this point. But if we rotate to the shroud, we actually find that there's a little stain, possibly blood stain, running down the same place. If we drop down to the tip of the nose on the icon and then shift to the shroud, we notice the configuration of the nose is quite exacting. Looking down at the lips on the icon, we see that there are apparently chapped lips here. But if we look at the detail on the shroud, we notice that all of those marks are visible on the shroud.
Jesus was the most illustrated person in history, but the Bible never said what he looked like. How do we know? How do we know he had a beard? How do we know he had long hair? Where did artists get their imagery from?
Povjesničar umjetnosti Jack Riley proučavao je lice Isusa na slici. Postoji li zajednički izvor za tu sliku koju svi tako dobro poznajemo? Svaki umjetnik ima svoje viđenje čovjeka, patnika, pobjednika, otkupitelja, poniznog. Ipak tijekom stoljeća umjetnici su se držali određenih parametara koji nam omogućuju da prepoznamo čovjeka kao Isusa. Koja je bila ideja vodilja i odakle potječe? Riley i mnogi drugi istraživači vjeruju kako je prije mnogo stoljeća postojao prototip Isusa koji je odredio način njegova prikazivanja. Traženje prototipa istraživača je odvelo natrag u prva stoljeća poslije Isusove smrti.
Falling down, parted in the middle on both sides. Not here. This Jesus looks like a Roman god. He's painted in a youthful manner. Doesn't have the same characteristics. The question is, what's missing? In the 1930s, French researcher Paul Vignon noted numerous markings on the paintings that have been done of Jesus Christ for many years. These came to be known as the Vignon markings. Let's take a look at some of them. First of all, notice this line transversing across the forehead of Christ. And look at this, a geometric three-sided square on the bridge of the nose. Also, another triangle right here on the nose, an elongated nose that is indicative of numerous paintings of Christ from the period dating back almost as far as we can remember.
Znanstvenici su identificirali oči poput sove, dugi nos i ostatak Vignonovih oznaka na platnu. Je li platno bilo model?
Here we have some reproductions of some 11th and 12th century paintings in which you'll notice these geometric markings. First of all, right here between the nose, you see that strange geometric U-shaped three-sided square. The owl-like eyes. The elongated nose is a characteristic. Notice the two long strands of hair hanging down on the forehead. On all four of these images, all four, you see the wisps of hair. Not one strand, but you actually have two strands of hair. All of these markings, all of these congruent points lead me to believe that something influenced these artists.
Ove se sličnosti ne nalaze samo na slikama. Ovaj je novčić iskovan 695. godine.
We see on the coin a rather crude image here, but as we rotate our filter and then go back and forth, we notice there are some remarkable similarities. For instance, if we look on the coin, we notice these large clefts off the side of the face here, but if we go to the shroud, we see exactly the same cleft. On the coin, there's a bridge across right here. We rotate the shroud, we notice the same bridge there. On the coin, there's a little outpouching here. We rotate the shroud, there's the same outpouching right there. As we look at the eyebrows, we see these match up. If we look at this blood stain on the shroud here, we see that in the hair here, if we even drop down to the fold on the shroud across the neck, we see that the iconographer who was doing this dye for the coin included this very exactingly. And there's no question who the die cutter thought it was, because here it says, Isu Christus Rex Reginatium, around here, Jesus Christ, King of Kings.
Ako je platno Isusov mrtvački pokrov, tada ono svoje putovanje počinje ovdje gdje je Isus umro. U modernom Jeruzalemu prošlost još živi. Mnogi običaji još odražavaju stari svijet. Poklapa li se pokop čovjeka s platna s drevnom židovskom kulturom? Rabin Miha Halpern, rođen u Americi, živi u Izraelu mnogo godina. Stručnjak je za židovski život iz 1. stoljeća.
This is the Via Dolorosa. It's about 1 mile long. It's the traditional place from which Jesus walked to his crucifixion. And pilgrims come from all over the world and have been coming for centuries to traverse this very path. Jerusalem at the time was a Jewish city, and as a result, Jesus would have been buried in the context of Jewish law.
Znanstvenici koji proučavaju platno vjeruju da je Isusov pokop, iako obavljen u žurbi, bio prema židovskom običaju.
The Jewish Bible relates that one should remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. On Friday afternoon, people are running and hustling and bustling in order to finish their chores before the Sabbath enters. So too was the case 2,000 years ago. Jesus was taken down from the cross on Friday in order to speedily inter him before the Sabbath day, because nothing can be done on Sabbath. No work, only rest.
Postoji li kakav zapis o platnu iz tih najranijih godina odmah poslije Isusove smrti? Prema legendi, kralj obližnje Edese teško se razbolio i pozvao je židovskog iscijelitelja. Isus je već umro, ali je kralju poslana tkanina koja je nosila njegovu sliku. Kralj Abgar odmah je ozdravio i čudotvorno je platno postalo poznato pod imenom mandylion. Mandylion se štovao po čitavom Srednjem istoku kao slika Kristova, a Edesa je postala središtem kršćanstva.
Mandylion is a word that means little towel. On this little towel was the face of Jesus, painted on a stylized background and usually shown framed.
Ako je mandylion bilo platno, zašto ono pokazuje samo lice?
It was then known only as a face cloth, but Ian Wilson, the English historian, says, there's a key word in ancient documents, tetradiplon, which means doubled in four. If you double the shroud in four, you end up with a little rectangle with a face in the middle.
Može li tkanina iz Edese biti platno tako složeno da otkriva samo lice?
The shroud is its own best map to the past. You start with one clue and it leads to another. Call volunteers, please. In 1978, the STURP team discovered a number of folds on the shroud. But of those, 8 were prominent. And what we're going to do now is replicate that folding of the shroud.
The raking light photographs proved, yes, there are 8 folds in the shroud. Of course, photography can't tell us when they were made, but it does show that at least at one time in its existence, that shroud was folded in 8. So there would have been a rectangle with the face sitting in the middle of the rectangle.
Godine 944. Mandylion je premješten u Konstantinopol, gdje je povremeno izlagan pogledu javnosti. Godine 1203. francuski je vitez iz 4. križarskog rata izvijestio kako je vidio sliku Kristova tijela na platnu. Godinu dana poslije, križari su opljačkali grad i plijen odnijeli u Europu. Tu se iznenada prekidaju vijesti o Mandylionu, a počinju zapisi o platnu.
This is a cave just outside of Jerusalem, which is probably very similar to the type of cave where Jesus himself was buried. It would be closed with a large rock, a boulder most probably, and that's how the Christian Bible actually describes the burial of Jesus.
Kada je ekipa za istraživanje torinskog platna ispitala donju stranu platna, utvrdila je kako se neka zrnca peluda ne mogu identificirati jer su prekrivena mineralom. Taj mineral analiziran i ušlo mu se u trag.
And investigating the mineral, they discovered that it was a limestone of sorts. A limestone very, very rare and indigenous to an area outside of Jerusalem. The shroud is covered with blood. So the question would be, why wasn't the body of Jesus properly washed the way in which traditional burial requires in Jewish law? So the answer would be that when there's a tremendous amount of bleeding, one doesn't purify the body with water for fear that one would wash off all of that blood has to be buried with the body itself. We find that even in today's news accounts of the terror attacks in Israel, let's say, for instance, when in the aftermath of those events, you have rabbis and righteous people going around literally sponging up the blood of victims, which is on the ground, to be buried appropriately.
Prema kršćanskoj Bibliji, na grobu su nađene 2 tkanine, platno i još jedna tkanina. Drugom su, vjeruje se, pokrili Isusovo lice odmah pošto je skinut s križa. Šimun Petar vidio je tkaninu na zemlji i onu koja mu je pokrivala lice i ta je bila posebno složena. Ova tkanina, zvana Sudarium, nađena je u Oviedu na sjeveru Španjolske. Jorge Rodriguez, član je Španjolskog centra za proučavanje platna, a Mark Gassin napisao je nedavno knjigu o Sudariumu i njegove vezi s platnom. Sudarium sadržava tragove krvi, ali nema slike kao na platnu. Vjeruje se da je to tkanina maknuta s lica prije nego što je tijelo umotano u platno.
The cloth is running away from danger. It was always just ahead of the invaders, just escaping, always going further north to the safer places, and this is where it stayed. This was the safest place in Spain during the Moorish invasion.
Ono je svoje putovanje počelo godine 614. kako bi pobjeglo pred navalom perzijske vojske. Prvo je odneseno u Aleksandriju i onda više puta zapadno duž Afričke obale, sve dok nije stiglo do Toleda u kršćanskoj Španjolskoj. Kad su 711. Mauri počeli osvajati Španjolsku, Sudarium je krenuo još dalje na sjever, u planine gdje je skriven u špilju. Upotrebljavajući repliku, istraživači pokazuju kako je tkanina bila omotana oko lica. Oni vjeruju da je bila pritisnuta na lice kako bi upila krv i znoj, a prema židovskom običaju iz poštovanja prekrivala lice žrtve nasilja i zatim se sačuvala kako bi krv ostala s tijelom.
And these stains here are particularly interesting because they coincide exactly with the stains on the back of the shroud, on the dorsal image of the blood again that was caught in the hair from the wounds from the crown of thorns. They're exactly the same here.
Novija videoanaliza doktora Wengera otkriva znakovite sličnosti između Sudariuma i platna.
Here is the shroud face superimposed on that of the Sudarium. Blood stains, that's the most marked one, and one of the easier reference is this blood stain right here. Dropping down to the area on the nose, as we see congruence down here, and as we shift into the hair here, we can see again congruences of these blood stains.
Krvna grupa na tkanini izovijeda jest AB. Ista je krvna grupa nađena i na platnu.
We know for a fact that the Sudarium has been in Spain since the 7th century. This in itself undercuts the shroud's carbon dating by at least 600 years. The Book of Testaments, which is here in the cathedral, takes the Sudarium even further back, and we believe that it takes it all the way back to the 1st century, that it was one of the burial cloths of Christ, or used just before the burial.
Godine 1988. ugljikov test pokazao je da platno nije starije od 600 godina. Tako se činilo da je to kraj znanstvenog istraživanja tkanine. Mnogo je teorije izneseno o tome zašto ti testovi nisu točni, ali to nije uvjerilo mnogo znanstvenika. Onda je mikrobiolog dr. Gazavaldez objavio važno otkriće. Sloj koji prekriva vlakna stare tkanine može iskriviti rezultate testa s ugljikom. Godine 1966. testirao je nova vlakna s platna i našao dovoljno tog pokrivala da značajno iskrivi rezultate testa s ugljikom. Fizičar dr. Harry Gove izumitelj je suvremene tehnike testiranja ugljikom.
This bacterial contamination is something that the people who did the carbon dating were not aware of. In fact, I don't think anyone was aware of it until Garza Valdez discovered this possibility. Even if they had been aware of it, the cleaning procedure that they used would not have taken care of it. So there was no way that they could have made an absolutely unequivocal date of the shroud material.
S rezultatima ugljikova testa znanstvenici već rade kako bi našli načina da odvoje bioplastičnu prevlaku s originalne tkanine.
When the procedure for separating the cellulose from the bioplastic coating is well established, then I think we would be prepared to offer to do another carbon date on the shroud. Whether the offer would be accepted is not at all clear.
U vezi s testiranjem ugljikom postoji još jedan činitelj koji bi, da je pokazao, definitivno zanijekao rezultate, a to je zračenje.
if what I am told by physicists is correct, it's a projected image. And in other words, it's almost as though the body were floating in the middle of the cloth and all of the projection comes off at right angles to the body.
This image is directly collimated from the body. That is, it's parallel to gravity. This is so unique that it has to be explained as a radiation phenomena.
And as we rotate back and forth,
Zračenje je možda jedini način na koji se može objasniti noviji nalaz o tome, da je slika kao jedna rengenska zraka koja otkriva unutarnju strukturu tijela.
Even more striking as we shift up to the wrist area and rotate back and forth, looking here, we can identify the individual wrist bones on the shroud of Turin. We see skeletal features in the depth of the body consistent with some type of X-radiation. And so we feel that the image, other than the direct contact from blood and so forth, is basically formed by this remarkable and unique situation of radiation.
Stavljanjem lubanje na lice s platna, veoma se jasno otkrivaju unutarnje strukture.
We can see that we are seeing the images of teeth here. As we shift back and forth, we can see on the shroud here are the teeth, roots and all, having the X-ray appearance.
Što je onda izvor zračenja? Neki istraživači smatraju da i na to imaju odgovor.
I believe this image is on the cloth because of the transformation that occurred during the resurrection. The body transferred from one medium to another, and in so doing, it left a recoil. And it's just such a recoil of particles radiating from the body that marked the image on the shroud.
That's why we get the three-dimensional effect and other things. What does that? I don't know. Let alone, how do you get that kind of energy out of a corpse?
We will never know if the image on the cloth is Jesus. The fascination itself, though, with the cloth is that it links us, everyone, to a death. The death of a person. This shroud is symbolic of the big issues of life after death. Is there a world afterwards?
What is the meaning of the shroud? I don't think it's essential to anyone's faith. But in that same chapter 20 of the Gospel of John that describes its discovery in the empty tomb, we also have the story of the doubting Thomas. I think there's still a lot of folk around in the 20th century whose spiritual birth certificates are from Missouri. You've got to show me.
What kept my attention over all these years is the sheer mystery of it. I feel that there are clues on the shroud that have not been revealed yet, have not been made evident and clear to people, that will tell the story of the shroud and how it came to be.
I knew people were going to ask me whether I had any great religious experiences or anything like that. So I sat down about 3 o'clock in the morning, and very quiet, there weren't anybody around, and looked at the shroud and said, okay, how do you feel? What do you feel? No, I had no great religious experience. I didn't, But the one thing that kept really sinking into my mind was looking at the face as opposed to the body. The face has a very serene, peaceful look. And the body is terribly beat up. The two just don't go together.
Our team spent hundreds of thousands of hours. And after that period of time, remembering that our primary goal was to go and determine how the image was formed, came back with nothing. Could not answer that question. So in essence, we can tell you what it's not, but we cannot tell you what it is.
Theology should not be in conflict with technology. Reason can never prove the divinity of Christ. Science can't make a theological statement. At best, it can say, this probably wrapped the historical Jesus of Nazareth. But the question that theology asked is, who do you say that I am? No scientific laboratory can answer that one. It's still up to the individual to review the evidence and decide for him or herself just what the Shroud of Turin really is.
The Shroud of Turin has made a greater impression on my life than anything else. It's kept my total attention for over 20 years. I'm not through with it at this time. I expect that it'll be the major focus of my attention the rest of my life.
Della presenza di Cristo in mezzo a noi, sono stato poi davanti alla sindone, il prezioso lino che può esserci di aiuto per meglio capire il mistero dell'amore del Figlio di Dio per noi. La sindone è provocazione all'intelligenza. Essa richiede innanzitutto l'impegno di ogni uomo, in particolare del ricercatore, per cogliere con umiltà il messaggio profondo inviato alla sua ragione e dalla sua vita. Il fascino misterioso esercitato dalla sindone spinge a formulare domande sul rapporto tra il sacro lino della vicenda storica di Gesù. Non trattandosi di una materia di fede, la Chiesa non ha competenza specifica per pronunciarsi su tali questioni. Essa affida agli scienziati il compito di continuare ad indagare per giungere a trovare risposte adeguate agli interrogativi connessi con questo lenzuolo che secondo la tradizione avrebbe avvolto il corpo del nostro Redentore quando fu deposto dalla croce. La Chiesa esorta ad affrontare lo studio della sindone senza posizioni precostituite che diano per scontati i risultati che tali non sono. Li invita ad agire con libertà interiore e premuroso rispetto sia della metodologia scientifica sia della sensibilità dei credenti.